This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. The NSE 20 over in Kenya dipped back under the 2,000 points mark in trading today. Moody's also essentially downgraded the outlook on three Kenyan banks. The top two, that's KCB and Equity, and another one that's also in the top five cooperative banks, citing the large exposure to the sovereign as well. And remember, the outlook on the sovereign also did change last week from stable to negative. In South Africa, the emergency budget is coming in another 6 weeks, around the 24th of June. It'll make provisions for the emergency support measures needed to help the country get through the economic damage inflicted by COVID-19. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll explore the biting sugar shortage in Tanzania. Plans to privatize Ethio Telecom remain on track despite the disruption of COVID-19. And India's Prime Minister has unveiled a $266 billion stimulus plan for Asia's third largest economy. But let's start tonight in Tanzania, where a rather acute shortage of sugar is causing a fair bit of frustration among traders and consumers alike. Authorities in the East African nation say that the ongoing pandemic has disrupted planned importation schedules. Now, to offset this nationwide supply crisis, the government has imported some 25,000 tons of sugar. Sugar scarcity did worsen in Dar es Salaam just last week after authorities launched a crackdown on retailers who they accused of selling the commodity at above the $1.17 ceiling set by the government back in April. Now, with a population of more than 50 million people, Tanzania's annual sugar consumption is estimated at about 590,000 tons. Of that, 135,000 goes straight into the industrial sector. Another 455,000 is essentially utilized by the domestic side. All right then, so let's dig a little deeper into the details of this particular story. Ivan Temiro is an economist. He's the co-founder and partner at Bankable Tanzania. He joins us on the line from Dar es Salaam as well. Ivan, thank you for your time. Just last June, Tanzania had banned sugar imports in order to shield local traders and producers, but it reversed that decision earlier this year. But given that Tanzania is a net importer of sugar, why would it ban sugar imports in the first place?
All right, thanks for having me. So it's true, we are a net importer, around 100K ton deficit or so annually. I think the important thing to understand here is the seasonal pattern of sugar production in country. There's always a bit of stop or stay in production between March and June during the heavy rains, where the plantations are unable to put in the harvesters on the soft soil and do much production during that time. So that's normally the period where we always run a bit of a deficit, for which we have imports coming in to sort of fill that gap. And I think around June, July, that deficit normally abates as the production processes remain and the plants open up again. So you do tend to get these cycles where there's a time where we do need the imports, which is coordinated by the government and the sugar board, and there is a time where they're not required. So I guess that sort of lag into one period into another may feel a bit unorthodox, whether or not imports are allowed and then they're banned again, etc. It's just to understand that seasonal pattern that we have on sugar production locally.
Indeed, but seasonality aside, Uganda is a source of relatively cheap sugar within the East African community, of which Tanzania is a part. Is some of the current consignment of sugar coming in mostly from Uganda, or is it a combination of Ugandan imports plus imports from other countries?
I would think it's a combination of various sources, because what now happens under the government's directives in terms of how we deal with this gap is that there is a known deficit. And apart from previously in previous administrations where you had various different suppliers or companies getting the permits, I think the permits right now are really being focused in on the main suppliers themselves, the main producers in country, depending on the kinds of demands that they're seeing on their side whilst their plants are closed, and through a coordination between the Ministry of Industry and Trade and the sugar board locally, they then sort of gang up together in terms of where they purchase the sugar. I'm pretty comfortable it would be at the best price possible. So it would make sense if it come from very near in terms of Uganda. So I'm not exactly sure the exact mix though of the purchases.
Indeed, I'm asking that because in the past, Tanzania has had several rows with their neighbours in East Africa when it comes to sugar imports. It's a hot topic across the region. In the past, Tanzania has imposed a 25% import duty on sugar coming in from Uganda, despite the AAC Common Protocol, which all of these countries signed, essentially saying, look, you should zero-rate produce from within the region. What exactly is it that ails Tanzania's domestic sugar sector? Why is this commodity such a hot topic?
I think definitely we start from the point of view that it's a growing economy. It's 55 million people. Some of the urban areas are going quite strong. Sugar demand growth is quite strong. It's a lucrative business. And I think in the past, the administrations did really struggle with cartel-type behavior and how the permits were done. I think what we're seeing now is a really strong clampdown on the orderly importing of sugar, and to the point that it's done through the various companies that are involved in sugar, not somebody who's not involved within the industry. And I think what is particularly relevant this time around as well, much as it's the same seasonal pattern and it's the same closure of production in Q2, obviously Q2 has coincided with COVID-19 in a way. And so you can also imagine some further disruptions in terms of logistics of getting consignments in a timely manner. And I think if you add to the mix as well, Tanzania and the main urban metropolises here, which have quite a huge Muslim community, are in the holy month of Ramadan, and sugar consumption tends to go up a bit during that time as well. So there is a bit of a cocktail of different things sort of all coming to a head. And it's really sort of continued to make for a very interesting scenarios within the industry. If there's one plus I'd give is that it is a very profitable industry. There's been a lot of efforts to put a lot of order in it, and the consignment is coming. So it'll really be interesting to see how this plays out in the next couple of days for the community, especially as we head into the Eid holiday itself. Later in a week or so.
Indeed, it's quite the perfect cocktail, really, of factors going into the sugar storm. Ivan Tamira there, live in Dar es Salaam. Thank you. Now, the ongoing COVID-19 crisis is also eviscerating Tanzania's tourism sector. The government says it's so far lost about $43 million in revenue, and over 400,000 people in that sector are said to lose their jobs because of this pandemic. Tourism is one of Tanzania's largest foreign exchange earners. The industry as a whole contributes an average of $2 billion of revenue to the East African nation every year. That's roughly 25% of all its foreign currency earnings. On to North Africa now. Libya's central bank says oil revenues in the North African state will fall by nearly 84% this year. Libya highly depends on revenues from its petroleum industry, which accounts for over 95% of export earnings and roughly 60% of its economic output. CGTN's Adel Elmarouki has the details.
Libya's central bank is warning that oil revenues in 2020 could drop to just $5 billion if the closure of oil fields continues. It's a sharp drop from the $31 billion reported last year. Since January 18, on the eve of the Berlin-Libya conference, all Libya's oil fields controlled by the Libyan National Army forces have shut down.
Libya has unfortunately faced losses estimated at $4.5 billion since January because of the lockdown led by some parties. They have put forward some conditions, among them to change the head of the National Oil Authority and to relocate its headquarters to Benghazi. They have also demanded the sacking of the head of the central bank, who has been authorizing major finances to the militias supporting the government of national accord.
The LNA-enforced oil siege has deprived the country from its only significant source of foreign currency. Now the fiscal deficit is forecasted to widen to $19 billion from a surplus of $1.8 billion in 2019, depriving Libyans from basic necessities, including electricity.
Libyans are definitely suffering tremendously. There is an economic recession. It lost some $100 billion since 2011 in finances spent on arms and militias. Libya has lost investments poured into oil, gas and infrastructure because of the volatile security situation.
The only oil field officially operating is Al Bouri. It produces some 30,000 barrels a day, all of which exported to Italy. This oil field in the northwest is controlled by the government of National Accord, which has been fending off the LNA's military offensive on the capital Tripoli for more than a year now. But most of the country's oil production comes from the east and south regions, which General Khalifa Haftar's LNA forces control. International restrictions have given the Libyan National Oil Company exclusive rights to trade in the nation's oil. The company is currently based in Tripoli. It wires its revenues to the central bank, which the GNA controls. The lack of balance in distributing oil revenues has encouraged the LNA forces to keep the oil lockdown enforced. The step has not stopped the civil war, though. With official oil exports dropping by more than 92%, Libya's economy is sinking under these dire circumstances. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now then, on to South Africa, with several listed companies like Come, for example, going into business rescue, either voluntarily or not. It's a local form of business administration. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange will now try and provide relief measures to enterprises in distress. The move by Africa's largest bourse would not only try and limit the economic damage that the pandemic is having on enterprises, but it will also offer them a bit more time for recovery. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola.
The JSE says it will engage with companies and review requests on a case-by-case basis. It will grant distressed companies extended payment terms of between 3 and 6 months, with no interest charged.
Some of the motivation for our relief measures, they came through conversations or problem statements that we've had with our clients that we responded to. And these are just short-term measures of relief. They are not by no ways or means or forms do they solve the bigger picture problem.
The entire spectrum of listed companies are suffering, from large to small caps, the BEE sector and the juniors. The small caps may have funding concerns for operations and balance sheets.
We suspect that many of them may need to come to market to raise additional funding. So the two areas in the small cap space that we focused on was, one, a reduced fee in the additional capital raise portion. So if they had to come to market to raise more capital, either through equity or debt issuance, additional issuance, and then to stimulate and to increase the appeal factor from a trade perspective, we've reduced the trading, clearing and settlement, and some other broker-dealer fees in the trade activity.
Trading volumes on the JSE were volatile in March and April, with some pullback in early May, but the small caps lost out on most of this trading activity.
So March and April saw elevated trade activity, lots more exaggerated through March, where we even saw some of our record days, isolated days in trade activity, whether it was on value traded or the volumes that went through our market across asset classes, from equities, bonds, our currency market, and not so much in the commodity space that was related to COVID at this point in time.
Listed companies, regardless of their size, aren't out of the woods just yet. There's still the Moody's downgrade overhang to contend with, and funding for the national budget. This, coupled with the economic recession, doesn't make for a very positive environment. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
According to the World Bank, global remittance flows are forecast to fall by about 20% in 2020 due to the economic damage being inflicted by COVID-19. That's the steepest decline on record. Tunisian workers abroad, as well as the sub-Saharan migrant community in the North African country, have been largely affected by this crisis. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
There are more than 1 million Tunisian migrants in Europe, the Gulf region, and North America. Their annual remittances amount to around $2 billion. However, the COVID-19 crisis, which hit the world, has caused the sharpest decline of remittances in recent years.
According to the Central Bank of Tunisia, remittances increased by 11% from January to 10th March. However, remittances have dropped by 8% until April 30th. There was a sharp decline in remittances in this period due to the pandemic. If this trend continues, the decrease could hit 20% and have a negative repercussion on the developing world economies.
According to the Migration Department at the Ministry of Social Affairs, there are tens of thousands of sub-Saharan workers in Tunisia. The majority assert that they have been unable to transfer remittances to their families.
I'm a young migrant worker just like many others who came to Tunisia to earn a living and to send remittances to my family. Nowadays, this has become very complicated because life is too hard.
Migrant workers also describe the coronavirus pandemic as the worst crisis which has affected migrant communities, as well as the flow of remittances.
Here in Tunisia, the coronavirus crisis has caused inflation. One is just focused on putting food on the table. It's impossible to send money back home.
Economists say Tunisian and other African migrant workers send on average $200 or $300 home every 1 or 2 months. This sum can make up to 60% of the household's total income. Tunisia has eased some lockdown restrictions as part of the implementation of Phase 1 of the targeted health deconfinement. Analysts assert that Tunisian migrants abroad, as well as migrant communities in the country, will be able to send money home after resuming work. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
In Zimbabwe, SMEs that are in distress given this pandemic and all the economic damage it's inflicting are in line for financial aid packages under a multi-million-dollar stimulus package that the government is setting up. Here's CGTN's Farai Mokhtar explaining how it would work.
Sibusisiwe Manjanda's IT company is reeling from the double blow dealt by the coronavirus. Supply shocks have delayed inbound components and suspended projects have shrunk demand. She's just reopened after more than a month under lockdown.
Even our clients that owed us, they were not in a position to pay us because they didn't have any business for that period. So it has basically affected our revenue. At the same time, some obligations still were there.
The fragile state the economy has been placed in has led government to unveil a $720 million stimulus package, 20 million of which is for small businesses like this one. The shot in the arm will help it prepare for the uncertain future.
We've realized that Wi-Fi is the thing to go, and people need to work from home right now. So the gadgets in that space they've been a high demand in that space. So for us, if we can be funded and be able to import those goods, that's what we have been doing a bit, though it has taken some time. But in that area, if we are equipped, we can source the goods. We cannot operate like we were doing maybe in January or last year. We need to move from that because things have changed. The way we are working and the things that might be required have changed.
That may demand some out-of-the-box thinking to focus on product lines that will be in peak demand going forward, and even some that businesses may have never traded in before. Sibusisiwe will start supplying personal protective equipment to bridge shortages. But beyond financial aid, businesses also need moral support.
I think we will need also to train and counsel and make sure that people are not alone. Because as we speak, people are alone out there stressing. They will need to be rehabilitated. Some of them really, they will need training and encouragement that life needs to start and go on.
A shoulder to lean on could help with that recovery. Farai Mokhtar, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
All right, then, a run through some company headlines. Starting in the telco sector, Airtel Africa revenue went up by 11.2% to about $3.42 billion for the year ending on the 31st of March. That performance was largely driven by growth in its customer base. It was up by nearly 12% to over 110 million in that period. Now, Airtel Africa does cover at least 14 different markets, including Nigeria, Kenya, and Gabon. The company went public last year with a London listing. Since then, it's benefited from a steady demand in emerging markets. Fuel prices are set to reduce even further this month in Kenya after the government rejected a petition by oil marketers for exclusion of cheaper fuel. Now, marketers in the East African economy have complained of low sales owing to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. They're looking to have high fuel prices announced for the next 1 month to protect their profits, arguing they still have about as much as 40% of the stocks that they had bought expensively before prices took a nosedive. The South African franchise restaurant chain Spur Corporation is in talks with financial institutions to secure credit lines if the economic impact of COVID-19 extends beyond the current year. The group says it will also implement a 20% salary reduction from June. Fees for non-executive directors will also be slashed by a similar proportion. Since the start of South Africa's COVID-19 lockdown, Spur has seen its sales fall dramatically by nearly half. And finally, Europe's largest travel group, TUI, plans to cut up to 8,000 jobs in response to the COVID-19 chaos that's currently engulfing the tourism sector around the world. The firm lost over $800 million in revenue in the first 3 months of this year, requiring a rapid bailout from the German government. Travel restrictions in most of its main markets have destroyed demand for holidays, with 9 in 10 TUI employees furloughed or given pay cuts in a desperate attempt to lower costs right across the company. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up shortly. We'll explore why plans to privatize Ethio Telecom are still on track despite the disruption from COVID-19. And the COVID-19 pandemic is also disrupting fertilizer imports in Nigeria. We'll tell you how when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Ethiopia. Authorities there say they will soon offer companies a chance to invest in its telecommunications sector. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic obviously has delayed the timeline of this process, but the government says it's still determined to complete it within the year as earlier planned. You see, back in 2018, Ethiopia announced that it will open up its telecommunications sector. At this point in time, Ethio Telecom currently enjoys a monopoly over that market of at least 100 million people. The hope is that this will attract better services and prices for consumers. CGTN's Coletta Njohui spoke to Ethiopia's State Minister of Finance. She filed this report.
Ethiopia's plan was to introduce 3 new players to join its telecommunications sector by the first quarter of this year. The idea is to have a company buy a minority stake of the incumbent operator Ethio Telecom and 2 additional licenses to be issued to individual telecommunications operators. The government says because of COVID-19 disruptions, it has begun online consultation through the Ethiopian Communications Authority, ECA.
ECA has to come up with a number of directives that would allow the liberalization process. To support that work, ECA has finalized the directives and actually is conducted a webinar, an online public consultation so that this process continues. Would continue to issue, we should be issuing the expression of interest, for instance, on the licensing area very shortly. The preparation is being finalized.
However, it admits that there may be a delay in the liberalization process.
There will be some natural delay if people need to come here, do their DD. I mean, this is a very big transaction, as you can imagine. It requires physical visit discussions. So that would definitely add in some, a couple of months delay, we would assume. But whatever can be done remotely, we continue to do. But as you know, the world economy recovers and as people begin to travel, we go full force into the implementation.
In the meantime, it is working to boost investor confidence through measures that will keep the economy afloat through the COVID-19 period. The government has so far injected over $400 million from its own budget through the banking sector, in addition to tax reliefs. And it is looking for more.
The International Monetary Fund approved a highly needed financing of USD 411 million under the fund's rapid financing instrument. Additionally, financing for budgetary support is currently also being sought from international partners.
International companies with interest in bidding estimate that licenses may fetch at least $1 billion, as well as another $1 billion plus to build out networks. This is considered an expensive venture by interested companies, but with Ethiopia's population of over 100 million people and an estimated 50 million phone subscribers, the Ethiopian market remains attractive. Colette Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Ghana's annual consumer price inflation jumped to 10.6% in the month of April from 7.8% the previous month. The country's statistics office says this was driven mainly by higher food prices in areas affected by the government-ordered lockdowns intended to combat the spread of COVID-19. The office's monthly report said that both the annualized rate and the increase from one month to the next were the highest since Ghana rebased its consumer price index last August. Regions affected by the lockdowns last month, including the capital Accra and the second largest city in the country of Kumasi, they had average rates of inflation of about 8.8%. That's much higher than other parts of the country. Ghana produces oil, gold and cocoa. It has recorded over 5,000 cases of COVID-19, the most in West Africa. Due to this crisis, the government expects the economy to grow by just 1.5% this year. That, to put it in context, is the slowest growth rate Ghana has seen in nearly 4 decades. Now, Egyptians usually increase their consumption of just about everything during the month of Ramadan, but this year, this pandemic has greatly reversed that trend. Yamiche is one of the markets that has been affected. Yamiche is a term that Egyptians use to describe a collection of nuts and dried fruits, most of which is imported. CGTN's Adel El-Marouki found this report.
From raw to roasted and spiced nuts, packs of dried figs, apricot and raisins, with a touch of coconut, hibiscus or tamarind, and a good amount of dates. Egyptians have brilliantly labeled this whole list of items under one word, Yamiche. It's the usual basket for many Egyptian families during Ramadan, but this year, people are buying much less.
This pandemic has made me a bit cautious this year. Yes, I'm buying Yamiche, but not as much as last year, because I need to save some money for my needs during the following months. Many businesses have stopped, and we do not know what's going to happen next.
Orders for Yamiche imports begin 6 months before Ramadan, so supplies were all set long before the coronavirus pandemic hit. But with this global period of economic uncertainty, prices have fallen by up to $1 a kilo. That's around 15% for some items.
All products are available. Prices this year are excellent. Unlike last year, they are cheaper. Merchants bought their Ramadan inventory before the pandemic, so when we reported cases, they became afraid. When the government made a curfew, they dropped prices to get rid of the stock, fearing that a full lockdown could be imposed and then there would be no sales.
Chambers of Commerce in each city has reported an overall drop in sales ranging from 40 to 75%.
The Yamiche market has witnessed great consumer abandonment since the pandemic began. People are concerned, they fear the impact of the pandemic. Many are more concerned about securing their necessities first and their daily strategic goods.
Last Ramadan, the bill for Yamiche imports was at about $40 million. This year, merchants are rushing to store their product to preserve it for the next season. Adel El-Marouki, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, the squeamish among us will find the next story a little interesting. In Uganda, a snail farmer has started to use her animal's produce to make cosmetic products. Snail creams are a huge business in Asian countries. They're widely believed to slow down the procession of wrinkles and to heal acne, for example. The global snail cream market is forecast to reach about $700 million by 2025. That's according to Coherent Market Insights. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria has this report from Kampala.
A slimy way to nourish the skin. Lucy Shilingi is extracting slime from her snails to make cosmetic products. Lucy got into snail business after learning about it from West Africa, where snail farming is popular.
The different people I used to, especially women and youth, whom I used to visit in their homes to see their farms of snails. And also by the roadside, you see many more young people and women selling snails in there on trays, in calabashes. I really got interested in it.
With a startup capital from a microfinance support center of $78,000, Lucy is now setting up a cosmetic production line. For now, production of slime is still at small scale, but once the slime extractor is purchased, it will increase.
I put them in the funnel and just disturb them. Move the tunnel or the funnel around many times. They'll be irritated and they will release slime.
She's already offering a few samples of her cosmetic products like soap and lotions. And she's producing a range of fragrances that she expects will hit the market by mid-year. Over 35,000 snails are in these pens, but Lucy says these are still not enough to produce the amount of slime she would need to produce cosmetics, since she intends to go into mass production. She says she'll have to buy more slime from snail farmers outside this place. Snail farming is picking up in Uganda, but the meat is not eaten here. Still, those involved in snail farming say there is a large market among foreign expatriates and that it's not labor or capital intensive.
Especially when it comes to feeding, it doesn't need much. Like here, I've got my fruits, this green pasture. So it was so much conducive to me. At the end of the day, I just said, let me start up.
Lucy says expanding the snail products market beyond food is more lucrative.
I started reading much more. Then I asked myself, why is it that we are getting all these value addition products, especially for the cosmetics? You know, like oils, creams, lotions from Korea, from South Korea, from China, and they are all here. And they're still snails products.
Lucy's cosmetic company may be growing at a snail's pace now, but in the long run, she says her snails will produce a profitable slime for her products. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
On to West Africa now. The coronavirus outbreak is threatening food security in Nigeria. That's a situation that's also reflected across a lot of other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Farmers in Africa's most populous nation rely on fertilizers to boost their crop output and get a good harvest at the end of the year. But the lockdowns that we're seeing in the country and border closures since at least the middle of 2019 have all combined to hinder the importation of fertilizer. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalan brings us the details.
It's planting season for commercial farmers like Mata Ayuba. In his decade-long farming business, he has cultivated several crops, including corn, potatoes, strawberries, and carrots. But he foresees a major shortfall in his output this year due to the coronavirus outbreak.
The first issue we had was coming to the farm, being able to come to your farm, because then there was no movement. Yeah, and then secondly, with the issue of the coronavirus, I know there will be lockdown of let's say shops where probably we could get fertilizer and some of these chemicals we use on the farm. So yeah, it will affect us, yeah, seriously. The biggest challenge right now is fertilizer, access to fertilizer. We're able to get access to fertilizer, yeah, we will be able to farm, probably not as much as we used to. Right now, we don't have any fertilizer on ground. And usually, we use up to 200 bags of fertilizer, depending on how much we plant.
The federal government set up the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative in 2016, a program that supports farmers with fertilizer subsidies. But the pandemic has caused a hitch in production and disbursements. Imports of raw materials too have been stalled.
Initially, we normally receive our materials, raw materials from Ukraine, but now that the border is closed, no any importation of raw materials now. So presently, as of now I'm talking to you, we are not producing anything.
And for those in stock, the cost has more than doubled.
If we, the farmers, are not able to get fertilizer, or even if we're able to get fertilizer at a high price, it will definitely increase cost of production, and then it will increase the price of foodstuff, let's say food in general. If fertilizer is not available for farmers, if fertilizer is expensive or it's scarce, let's say, farmers won't be able to produce much, and the cost of foodstuff will definitely increase, and then it will lead to hunger. Since we, the farmers, won't be able to produce as we usually do, so people will definitely go into hardship.
The agricultural sector is one of Nigeria's main focus of diversifying the oil-dependent economy. The sector contributes 22.12% to the national GDP. Data from the Food and Agricultural Organization projects that 7 million Nigerians across 13 states will experience food shortage this year. But farmers envisage it could be even worse. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
At 18:36 GMT, it's time for a break. Here's what's coming up shortly. We'll be taking a closer look at the $266 billion stimulus plan unveiled by the Indian Prime Minister. And demand for bicycles in the United Kingdom is rising as lockdown measures are eased.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making headlines at this hour, starting in Algeria. An amendment to the Algerian constitution could allow the country's military to take part in missions abroad. Now, both France and the US have called for the Algerian military to take part in fighting the regional war against terror. The country is surrounded by other states like Mali, for example, which are fighting against militant groups. Dozens of Tunisian fishermen captured last week by Libyan armed men have been released. This comes in the wake of negotiations between Libyan and Tunisian parties. The Tunisian fishermen, 25 of them, are now back in their country. And controversy has arisen over an Egyptian TV show that envisions a future where the United States gets divided and Arabs liberate Jerusalem. In it, the state of Israel, as we know it at the moment, doesn't exist anymore. The show got an official condemnation from Israel's foreign ministry. That's a run through your headlines. India's government is rolling out a $266 billion stimulus package that's designed to limit the damage being inflicted on the economy by the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the funding package, which is roughly equal to about 10% of the country's GDP, during a national address on Tuesday, but he didn't provide any further details. Asia's third largest economy has credited its strict shutdown of nearly all activity in a country of 1.3 billion people for limiting the number of COVID-19 cases. It currently stands at just over 70,000 infections and just under 2,300 people dead. But it has come at a massive economic cost, with tens of millions of low-income Indians and migrant workers among the hardest hit.
All of our experts and scientists say that the coronavirus is going to be part of our lives for a long time. However, we cannot let our lives revolve around the coronavirus either. We shall wear masks, follow physical distancing, but we won't let our goals out of sight.
The unemployment rate across OECD member states rose by 40 basis points to 5.6% in March, reflecting the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in its very early stages. The number of unemployed persons across the OECD area, which now includes Colombia, rose by 2.1 million to 37 million total in the month of March. The rise was particularly severe among women and young people between the ages of 15 and 24. Female unemployment increased by 0.5 percentage points to 5.8%, compared with an increase of 0.3 percentage points for men to 5.3%. Youth unemployment was up by 100 basis points to 12.2%. Car sales in China grew last month for the first time in nearly 2 years. Sales were up 4.4% in the month of April compared to the same month a year ago, with just over 2 million vehicles flying off the showroom. Now, the growth is a much-needed relief for the world's largest single vehicle market as it struggles to emerge from a prolonged slump in demand.
At this car store in Shanghai's suburban Pudong, several cars displayed in the hall are already labeled as sold, with some customers having already chosen their favorite models. Rong Zhizhen is one of them. She decided to buy a new SUV last week and was coming to pay after having a try.
I have driven my old car for around 3 years. I wanted to buy an SUV this time. I had a test drive a few days ago and came to sign the contract today.
This dealer began seeing sales recovering in mid-April, and not surprisingly, sales in the dealership rose 20% from the previous month, to the same level as in April a year ago. Sales during the 5-day May Day holiday were 50% of the total sales in March, when much of the country was under coronavirus precautions. A lot of the current uptick in sales is down to easier financing.
Consumers are much more interested in financial services right now. Our packages spread the cost over a longer period and the monthly payment is less. The 5-year package is very popular. Customers need to only pay around 4,000 or 5,000 yuan a month.
British automaker Jaguar Land Rover has been pleased by the bump in sales. Richard Short, the president of the company's integrated marketing, sales and service department, says the China market is increasingly important to the company.
What we've seen is in April, we're broadly back to the same level as last year. That recovery is a little bit unexpected. It's come back really quickly, which is very good and positive.
All this good news is a ray of hope for world automakers who have been badly hit by the coronavirus pandemic. Sino-German joint venture Volkswagen delivered more than 165,000 vehicles under the Volkswagen, Audi and Jetta brands in April, up 9.9% year-on-year. And China's largest automaker Geely has also had their share of the rebound.
In April, Geely sold more than 100,000 cars, a year-on-year increase of 2%, and that's also 44% higher than sales in March. Volvo China sold some 14,700 cars during April, jumping 21% from the same period last year. That set a record for April sales. It's very positive.
According to China's Association of Automobile Manufacturers, vehicle sales in China exceeded 2 million in April, up 4.4% from a year earlier. ending 21 months of decline in the world's largest auto market.
We see government policies that is promoting, I would say, the regenerating the dynamics of the automotive market in China, as well as the consumers still do have a very strong need of either getting a new car or they're replacing their existing cars. We don't see a fundamental change in terms of the basic infrastructures of the market. So we do see that the market, after a pretty bad first quarter, will see a pretty nice bounce back in the rest of 3 quarters.
Zheng says that SUVs and sedans are the most popular vehicles among Chinese consumers. In April, sales of passenger cars accounted for about 74% of total vehicle sales. Commercial vehicles took up the remaining share, with 534,000 units sold last month. Zhang Shishen, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
The United Kingdom's first quarter GDP output contracted by 2%. That decline isn't just the fastest quarterly contraction since the global financial crisis, but the number did come in, paradoxically, above expectations. Markets were expecting a contraction of 2.5% in the first quarter of the year, following zero growth that we saw in the last quarter of 2019. Just last week, the Bank of England said it expects the country's economic output to contract by 14% this year. Even with current restrictions being relaxed by June, this would be the country's worst contraction in over 3 centuries. Now, the lack of clarity in the UK government's guidelines on how it will progressively ease the nationwide lockdown is causing a fair bit of confusion. It also does underline the fact, however, that getting the country back on track is no easy matter. CGTN's Andrew Wilson explains.
Only come to work if you can't work from home was the government's message, and a day ahead of schedule, in London at least, the response has been dramatic. Evidence also of early attempts to social distance on public transport and to open construction sites. But look a little further, and Britain, just like Europe, is still a long, long way off getting back to where it was. The public information system seems to be in overdrive, trying to add structure to the lack of political clarity. From the Department of Transport, wear a face covering, keep 2 meters distance, use contactless payment, avoid rush hour, wash your hands, and be considerate. If you can. In Parliament, confirmation from the Chancellor that the furlough job retention scheme, now supporting nearly 8 million salaries nationwide, will be extended to October.
Until the end of July, there will be no changes whatsoever. Then from August to October, the scheme will continue for all sectors and regions of the UK, but with greater flexibility to support the transition back to work. Employers currently using the scheme will be able to bring furloughed employees back part-time. And we will ask employers to start sharing with the government the cost of paying people's salaries.
As different sectors make their plans, Ryanair has announced it intends to reintroduce 40% of flights from 1st of July, subject to travel restrictions being lifted and airport safety measures. That could mean 1,000 flights a day. The vagueness of the politics only underlines the complicated balancing act needed to restart the UK economy. In practice, though, it's clear there will be those prepared to lead the charge. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Oxford, UK.
Still in the United Kingdom, thousands of people, as you just saw in that package, are preparing to return to work after more than 7 weeks of isolation. Public transportation is the main way to get around London, and many of those who are returning to work will have to use various public transport options. But the government is urging the public to avoid getting into crowded buses and trams in order to reduce the odds of being infected. And that has triggered a rise in demand for bicycles in London.
Some cities in Europe have developed safe and affordable alternatives such as emergency bike lanes and free bike share to limit public transport network use during the pandemic. This has led to a hike in demand for the two-wheelers in London.
We've seen that. We've seen a mixture of everybody, to be honest. We've seen commuters, people that commute all the time. We've seen new cyclists. We've seen people that have to get in, so they have bikes that have been in the shed for a little while.
The impact of COVID-19 has introduced new pressure on the supply chain, with bike orders waiting for months to be delivered.
The issue now is that all of our suppliers don't have any bikes. So it's not a case of what we have, it's what we can get. But it's getting so that the choice that we have now is getting less and less and less. So the next kind of batch of deliveries not until June.
The hike in demand for bikes in London further establishes the new normal in lifestyle options for commuters.
So when the lockdown started, obviously you can go only for one type of exercise. And I really like walking, and I usually go to my local park, but going there every day became a little bit boring. So I decided that cycling would be a nice activity to do because you can go different places.
I think it's just during this pandemic crisis, I was thinking like going to public transport is not something that I'm looking forward to again. So I was like, okay, we had to go bicycle.
Britain has seen more than 32,000 deaths in the outbreak, the worst in Europe and second only to the United States. And even as the nation begins to ease restrictions, there is need for deliberate effort to reset the options in the transport sector for the public to thrive post-COVID-19. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Right, then let's make a quick run through commodity prices. So a second quarter recovery, in quotes, that does seem to be the main theme really as far as commodities are concerned. And it isn't just about the main oil benchmarks, Brent and WTI. Copper contracts in London, for example, 14% lower so far in the year, but they've risen by 9.5% since the start of the quarter. Cocoa futures in London also 6.4% higher over that exact same period. In fact, they actually did hit an 8-week high in the process. But there are supply concerns that are driving prices higher for the most part on that commodity. The second largest producer of it, Ghana, has the highest caseload in West Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how a Nigerian chef is keeping her business afloat despite a lockdown in the federal capital. Welcome back to the program. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic does continue to wreak havoc on SMEs right across the world, but some entrepreneurs are devising creative ways of keeping their businesses afloat and agile. That's exactly what one chef in Nigeria's federal capital is doing. Chef Fatima, as she's known, is also cashing in on the ongoing month of Ramadan by helping families get the meals they crave to break their fast amidst the country's lockdown. CGTN's Deji Badmus has that story on Grassroots tonight.
It's not a particularly good time for restaurant owners in Nigeria. Many have had to shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Chef Fatima and her partner Chef Z have found a way to keep their business going while their restaurants remain short. Right here from their kitchen at home, they prepare an array of assorted eye-catching meals for delivery to clients in different parts of Abuja. Clients place orders on their social media platforms and make payments. Chef Fatima and her partner then get to work.
We cook for not less than 70 persons in a day. And that persons I'm talking about, it could be one goes for one family. That means we are cooking for like 10 family and we section it as one family. So we have different family like that do book for the food, then we deliver to them. And for that, we have to start cooking early.
With the Muslim Ramadan period now on, their business is witnessing some kind of boom. They're getting more orders and cooking more.
The request has actually come high with the Ramadan because one family, initially one person could just walk into the eatery and eat his food. But now with the Ramadan, maybe you have family of 8, family of 10, they will just book for their family, whole family, for us to deliver. So you can see from 1 to 10 is an improvement.
While the lockdown is taking a toll on thousands of businesses in Nigeria, Chef Fatima advises other caterers to be patient with the government, obey the lockdown orders, and work from home to stay safe.
Please take precaution because you need to be alive to even spend the money you made. So don't say the federal government say you should close down your eatery. For that, you want to jump out and jump in, please, because as you step out, if precautionary measure is not being taken, you don't just endanger yourself, you endanger the life of your family and including people that comes around you.
Chef Fatima also runs a culinary school where she trains thousands of young people in the art of catering. That school is also shut down, but she's still able to communicate with her trainees via social media. So despite the lockdown, it's more or less business as usual for this Nigerian celebrity chef. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja.
On to Ethiopia now, another example of African ingenuity. An aviation engineer there is using his free time to create medical supplies with 3D printers that he has. He's actually handing them out for free to medical practitioners as they await approval from the country's quality standards body. CGTN's Koleto Njoki visited his workshop. She filed this report.
By day, Farouk Mubarak is an aircraft technician, but at night he retreats to this small space at the back of his house. He has turned it into a 3D printing production room. Normally, he's printing off such items like children learning blocks and some architectural designs. But when COVID-19 arrived in Ethiopia, he turned his attention to much-needed medical supplies.
I have 5 projects related with COVID-19. The first one is a face shield. That shield, the upper and the lower part is 3D printed and the locally used transparent material. And it's a highly recommended shield for those people. The second one is masks, mouse masks. They call it N95 mouse masks. It's under study. The material versus human interaction is under study, but I've already printed 2 pieces and I'm trying to make a lot more. The third one, I'm making Y-splitter tubes, which makes a single ventilator for 2 patients.
He is also producing these models of the coronavirus, which can be used for training. His biggest challenge, though, is time. Even with 5 printers, he can't produce very much.
Now I'm making 4 face shields within 5 hours. That means a single face shield will take 1 hour and 20 minutes. So it's a long process. I have 5 small-size 3D printers. I'm trying to make 20 face shields per day. And for the mouse mask, it takes around 3 hours and 30 minutes for a single mouse mask.
Like in many other countries, Ethiopia is struggling with a shortage of such medical supplies and more.
So far, nationally, 24 testing laboratories have been set up, and at maximum capacity, these laboratories can undertake 5,600 tests per day. Nevertheless, one of the key challenges that has been cited by the Ministry of Health in increasing the daily testing capacity has been sample collection kit shortages.
Farouk says his next plan is to produce these swabs. Farouk's immediate plan is to buy another printer that can produce medical swabs, but in the long term, he hopes that he can be able to influence other people to adopt the 3D technology in addition to other technologies and take Ethiopia to a higher level of manufacturing. The government says it has noticed the growth in creativity like Farouk's, and the Ministry of Innovation will soon receive a fund to inject in such projects so that they can live even beyond COVID-19. But Farouk insists he's in it for charity.
In a country like us, we have a very few of them, very few doctors we have. We have to save those people. So that was the motive that makes me do this.
He says he will keep producing as much as he can and give to the medical professionals for free. Koleto Njoki, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Quick run through the currencies here for you. So the rand is still, of course, the worst performing currency of the months that we do track here against the American dollar. On the other end of the scale, though, this Bitcoin, just over $9,000, it's actually risen in dollar value terms by over 26% so far in the year. Where will it go amidst this pandemic? We'll find out and update you. But that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. The news continues on CGTN.